A Lucky Day by Toby Wacker. The boys stepped out from the woods into the grassy space by the river, shading their eyes with their hands. The sun beat down on them now that they were out of the tree cover. "It's so hot today," said John. "Wish we could go swimming." He watched the grass shimmer in the heat, rippling like the river beyond it. The water looked cool and tempting, but everyone knew it wasn't safe to swim this far upstream, in water goblin territory. Besides, it wasn't worth missing the fire show. This might be the only time all summer the jugglers came to perform. Charlie took off his glasses and wiped his forehead. "Why can't we stay in the shade?" Joe made a face at him. "Because the shade doesn't lead to the festival, dummy." He turned and scanned the open bank in front of them. "Tell you guys what, we're going to take the shortcut across the railroad bridge. That way we won't have to be in the sun very long, and we'll get there quicker." "But what if a train comes?" asked Charlie. John couldn't help wondering the same thing. "Aw, shut up," said Joe. "What are the chances? A train only comes like twice a day or something. Besides, I got my lucky rabbit's foot," piped up Earl, holding it out. "That'll make sure we get across." "Sure," said Joe, although John saw him roll his eyes. "A train won't come for hours. Now come on." The others followed him onto the bridge, Charlie trailing behind. The boys made their way from tie to tie. "You really think that thing works?" asked Joe when they were most of the way across. He eyed Earl's rabbit foot skeptically. "Of course it does," said Earl, indignant. "It helped me find my best marble when I dropped it in the street last month." "You sure have lost your marbles," said Joe. "Let me see that thing." Grabbing for it, he brushed its edge, just as Earl jerked his hand back. The rabbit foot spun away and dropped down between two of the ties into the river. "Look what you did!" yelped Earl. "That was mine!" Joe scowled down into the water where it had fallen. "Well, I didn't know you were going to move your hand. Can't waste time trying to get it back anyway. We don't want to be late for the fire show." "I don't even care about the dumb show," began Earl. "What was that noise?" John interrupted. Underneath their voices, he had heard a sound that wasn't the rush of the river below. They stopped 3/4 of the way across the long bridge. In the distance, a shrill whistle sounded again, louder this time. "It's a train! Run!" yelled Charlie, although he stood stock still. The train rounded a bend in the woods ahead and chugged straight toward them, large and shining and fast. Earl turned back the way they'd come, but Joe grabbed him by the collar of his shirt. "We can't outrun a train, dummy! Everyone get to the side, now!" he commanded, and they scrambled to obey. They lay flat on the narrow catwalk beside the tracks, and clung to it as the train came nearer and nearer. Then it was there, only a few feet away, shaking the whole world and blowing their hair back as it thundered by. John gripped the board for dear life. In front of his nose he saw the shuddering board crack and drop a half-inch. He stopped breathing. Was it rotten here? He started wriggling away. The board splintered. He scrambled back. And before he knew it, he was sliding off, feet first, into the air. He grabbed at the catwalk as he fell and only managed to brush it with his fingers. He hit the river with a huge splash. The bright sun and noise were gone in a shock of cool water. There was a moment of stillness as his momentum slowed, and he thought he felt his bare feet touch the muddy bottom for just a second. He came up gasping, bumped into a rock, and swirled away from it, wincing at the impact and at the thought that he could have hit it when he fell. The current spun him around so that he was looking back at the bridge. The train was gone, and the other boys were shouting and pointing over the side of the bridge at him. Then he was in clear water, a fast current in the middle of the river that carried him away. Ahead of him he saw something floating in the water. He kicked closer and saw that it was Earl's rabbit foot. He closed his hand around it. It sure was lucky to find it, he thought with a grin. As he started to swim back toward the bank, something caught at his ankle. He struggled against it, but it only wrapped itself higher up his leg. In the murky water he couldn't see anything, but he knew what it was. A water goblin! "Old goblin," he began. How did it go? Something sharp pinched his foot, and the words of the charm sprang into his head. "Old goblin, let me go! Old goblin, don't come near! If—" The goblin pulled him under the water, and the bubbles floated up from his mouth with his words.
"If you stay home down below, I'll go far away from here."
He clapped in slow motion, pushing his hands through the water with the rabbit foot caught between them. His ankle was freed abruptly. He thrashed upward and broke into the sunlight with a gasp. He struck out for the bank, coming ashore at last at a spot far downstream from the bridge. The festival was a short walk farther downstream. When he reached it, he looked around for the other boys, but they weren't there yet. What caught his eye was the big tent at the center of the festival where the jugglers performed. Suddenly, realizing that the ticket he had brought would be soaked, John reached into his pocket and groaned. It wasn't even there. Somehow it had washed away in the river. "Hey, Johnny!" he heard someone call. The other boys ran over to him. "We thought the water goblins had gotten you," said Charlie. "Man, you're soaking wet." "They almost did get me," said John, "but I knew the charm to make 'em let go. I'm glad it worked." "Yeah? Sure." Joe slapped him on the back. "Anyway, let's go see the fire show now. What do you say?" John grimaced. "Can't. I lost my ticket in the river. But that reminds me, Earl. I found your rabbit's foot floating in the water. Must be your lucky day, huh?" He held it out. Earl gasped. "My foot!" he exclaimed. "I told you it was lucky." He picked it up carefully, beaming. "Hey, tell you what. I'll trade you my ticket for it. I don't even like fire." He dug in his pocket and handed over a ticket. John took it and grinned at Earl. "All right now," said Joe. "I think they're starting. Let's go." Earl waved and trotted off into the festival. The rest of the boys turned to the tent, handed over their tickets, and lifted the flap. Inside, it was large and dim. Edging his way to a spot, John peered into the shadows and caught his breath as a spark flared up on the stage at the front of the tent. Seconds later, the jugglers raised their burning torches into the air, ready to start the show.